Hello and welcome to this talk show at World Water Week. My name is Lena Sherman and the talk show's name is the Water Justice Fund, Women at the Forefront. Lack of clean water and good sewage is devastating for all of humanity. But perhaps it affects women and children especially hard as they often are responsible for securing water and food. At the same time, women continue to have less access to resources and decision-making than men. The Water Justice Fund is an initiative by Simavi and Women Win that supports local women groups in Kenya, Nepal and Bangladesh. And with me here on the podium, I have Jane Rabera, Program Manager for Neighbours Initiative Alliance. Jane works in Kenya directly with communities most affected by climate change. And Ferle Verloren van Themat, Director of Fundraising and External Engagement at Simavi. And Ferle, I start with you. Why is this fund set up and what does it do?
Good question. Yes, so Simavi and Women Win, but also NIA and other local organizations started actually with this fund, designing it already 1.5 years ago. And the reason why I don't think in this crowd, but also for this audience, I have to explain that climate change has a severe effect, especially on water. And we see that the effects of water, the effects of climate change on water are severe, specifically in the countries who are already dealing with very poor water systems. And then within those countries, we see especially for those communities that are usually either left behind, hard to reach, and then within those communities, specifically for the women and girls. So on the one hand, we see that the climate crisis is really having a severe effect on water, like availability, water security, water insecurity. And at the same time, we see that there's a lot of climate financing, but a lot of that climate financing is not going to the countries, the communities, and the people that need it the most. So we thought, how can we change this? How can we change how funding structures are managed? We see that a lot of climate financing is going to large-scale infrastructural projects, but how can we make sure that actually that funding is going to really women themselves, support really locally led initiatives? So we started with the Water Justice Fund. Because there's a huge need. We see that only 1% of all the climate financing is going to initiatives that are led by women. So how can we change that? So we set up the fund with input from a lot of different organizations. It was launched during the UN Water Conference this year in New York. And what it is, well, very simple. It's actually a fund that funds locally led climate adaptation initiatives, directly funds local women's groups. So, for example, and Jane can tell more about it, we see that a lot of women groups, they have great ideas of what they can do in order to improve the water security in their environment, simply by planting trees around wells and other initiatives that are there. But we also, the fund also supports women activism around water. So supporting them with training, to advocate towards local governments, to make sure that the right to water is realized. So the fund is really based on those two ideas and really putting women leadership at the forefront and channeling funds straight to local women's groups. And through that, we really hope to change the way how financing, climate financing is being structured by really locally led, applying locally led adaptation principles. So kind of in a nutshell, that is what the fund does. So we started in March and we're piloting the funds now at the moment in 3 countries. With a strong ambition, of course, to grow. And over time, work in 10 different countries around the world. And supporting water activism around the world.
Sounds great. Jane, could you tell us a little bit about your work? What are you doing?
All right, my name is Jane Rabera Nyamomu. I work as a program manager for Neighbours Initiative Alliance. And we work with rural communities in Kajiado County in Kenya. And more specifically under the Water Justice Fund, we are working with rural women, grassroots women, in terms of looking at climate resilience and adaptation mechanisms, how they can come up with initiatives that will assist them to be adaptive to climate change. So when we sat together with SMAVI, we realized that a lot of funds are being given out for climate financing, but are we touching the most needy in the communities? So we realized that it's good to work with the rural women. We start from bottom up and see what kind of initiatives that they come up with. Normally, when there's a lot of challenges in climate change, women and girls are the most affected, but they are usually left behind. So how do we reach out to the most needy in those communities? That's why we agreed and decided to work with the rural women, and they come up with adaptation and mitigation mechanisms in climate change. And we looked at women should always not be victims of climate change, but can be utilized as promoters in coming up with adaptation and mitigation mechanism to make their livelihood better.
Do you have any specific story or any success story already, or?
Yes. Currently, we are working with 10 women groups in climate adaptation mechanisms, and we are doing activities around women creating their formidable voice towards raising issues on climate change and how they can be supported by governments. So normally they come together, we strengthen their capacity in advocacy and lobbying so that they can put the government to task so that they can be given money for climate financing. To be specific, we have a group that is called the Naishora Women Group that we've been working with in terms of how they can get water accessibility to their household, and they've been able to pipe water. They've solarized their borehole, and they've piped water to closer to their households. And now the communities can fetch water around there easily, because normally when the challenges of water, women have to walk up to 10 kilometers to go and access water. So currently they have that, and it's a small distance, like 200 meters from the household, and they're able to fetch their water. And that creates a lot of time for them to be involved in other economic activities. And secondly, they are utilizing the water in a project for drip irrigation, utilizing minimal water, efficient use of water to grow vegetables, and also to grow legumes for their livelihood consumption and also for sale. So it strengthens their capacity towards economically, they have money, which they use for taking their children to school, and also they improve the nutrition at the household level.
Is it the women that initiate those projects, or is it you, or how does it work?
The women put up concepts, and then we vet the concept, and we see they are relevant to the Water Justice Fund, and we fund them. So the women come up with the initiatives that they feel they can easily implement, and at the level of their literacy. Because when you look at the Maasai community, women they have low literacy levels, so they come up with initiatives that they can be able to implement.
Feli, you said that climate change is hitting women and children extra hard, putting their lives in danger. But can you explain why that is? Why is it hitting women and children extra hard?
Well, of course it is hitting, I think, everybody very hard around the world. But what we see is that women and girls, they are dealing much more with the consequences, specifically related also to water. Because, if wells are drying up, women have to walk longer distances in order to fetch water. We were also talking about it, Jane and I, how women have to wake up earlier in order to fetch water because they have to walk longer distances with a lot of dangers around gender-based violence, but also, well, specifically in your case, also around wild animals. At the same time, women have to deal a lot with how they manage the water, what are they going to prioritize for the water if there is no water, specifically around flooding. We see in Bangladesh that the floodings are increasing, so they have to deal all the time with how they manage the little or overwhelmed, done or dirty water that they have in their household, choose whether they are going to cook, feed the children, work on the land with. So it is women have to deal with those consequences much more on a daily basis. And like Jane was saying, and it's a very important point, is it's not only that we have to put them as victims, actually that is also making a lot of women early adopters. They're really early adapters to climate change because they have to think quicker how to deal with the dryness around us, how to deal with overabundance of water or dirty water. So you see in a lot of countries that women are also early adopters because also they have a lot of indigenous knowledge. So what can we do to tap into that and give them much more decision-making power by putting financing directly at their hands? So it is, we see that the consequences are felt much harder. They have to deal so much more, but there are also, I think, skills and a lot more knowledge that we now still, insufficiently use. So I think that is really an important point of the Water Justice Fund, that we say, okay, let's provide that financing, because for a lot of women it's very difficult to find access financings. So we're talking about small amounts. We're talking about grants of €1,500 or sometimes €700. To find easy solutions for the challenges that they face in their daily lives, for their communities.
Do you see any problem with this, to just give the money to the women? Have you faced any problem with that? I mean, have the women faced any problem with that, or?
Not really. Women are organized in groups, and those are purely women groups that are coming together and working on these initiatives that they've come up with. And the little money you give to a woman, she can do magic out of it. She can utilize the little, like even if you give them €1, they can make another euro out of it. They'll make good utilization of that money to make their lives better. And also in terms of looking at what is the best way to utilize this money to make their livelihood better. I like when you give a man, you can give a man €2, they enter into a hotel, eat all the money, and go back home empty-handed. But the woman will think first about her household and what is it that she'll utilize this money for. Yeah. So we haven't faced any challenges because we are purely working with women groups, and men don't interfere with women groups. Unless if it's a mixed group where we have men and women, that is when there's a challenge. But when we work with pure women groups, we don't face any challenges.
It might be a hard question, but this is well known. I've been hearing this for decades, that this is the fact that women can make it happen. And why haven't it been a fund like this before?
Well, I wish I could say that we are unique, but there are of course more funds currently. I think slowly this is growing to change actually how development finance mechanisms are going. To say a lot of times funding is going through a lot of different organizations, then it's going really directed from donors. They say this is what the project proposal should look like. And then what you see is that really the needs of local communities, and I think we all know that, are not taken into account. So this fund really wants to change the way how that financing is structured. And is it unique? We want to focus really also on the water challenges and really on that water adaptation and activism. In that sense, yes, it is unique. But I think there are a few more funds, and hopefully that is increasing also, because I think that is also something that we advocate for, that more and more of these really grassroots funding mechanisms are increasing. Because what we want to show is, yes, it can be successful by really providing seed funding to local initiatives. And maybe the whole idea of scaling into 100 billions of euros might not always be that most successful way of achieving results. So yes, the fund is unique in its approach and on its focus, but there are more funds, I would say, that are now slowly trying to change these power dynamics in how funding mechanisms are designed.
Is it only money that is needed?
No, absolutely not. I think what Jane is also doing, so what you see is what we do is through the funds, yes, funding is available, but the idea of the funds is that we support these women's groups not for a one-off, but maybe for a longer period, and try to also unlock more local capital so that these groups can also be strengthened and can increase. And of course, not all the initiatives will do that, but with some groups it will also increase their organizing. And it's not only funding, it is also supporting them with accessing local financial resources, improve their strengthening and organizing. So there are a number of elements, of course, that the funds is achieving, but that is really through all of the local organizations.
What do you say?
Yeah, we are supporting women to organize themselves and be strong, and also linking them to the local finances that are there for climate resilience that can support them. Not necessarily funding from Simavi, we also look at the sustainability mechanisms. What is it that the women can do for themselves to be sustainable? Even if Simavi is not there anymore, can the women still move forward? Can they access the locally funds that are available? So we are strengthening their capacity on how to organize themselves and also be able to access those locally available finances. We are also looking at them utilizing also their local knowledge, the indigenous knowledge that exists within their communities. How can they utilize that to be able to look at issues of climate change? How can they adapt the knowledge that they have and utilize them as women and assist themselves in terms of being resilient?
Do you have any example?
For example, for the early warning systems, they can be able to read the weather patterns using their locally or their indigenous knowledge. And they'll be able to tell that in the coming 4 weeks or 3 weeks, we'll be having rains. How can we put what is it that we can put in place to be able to harvest water? Do we have those containers? Do we have the infrastructure to be able to harvest water? Or the drought is coming. What can we put in place to be adaptable towards countering those changes in the weather patterns? Yeah.
But they have done that before, those predictions, and so
Majorly, it's done by men. It's not tapped on the women. So the women can tap on that knowledge that they have to be able to prepare themselves in terms of that.
Sally, you asked in your description for this session, how can we get involved? Well, how do we get involved, and why should we?
Well, there are actually different ways of how people and organizations can be involved. So whilst we are piloting the Water Justice Funds, we are also setting up a whole governance structure where we think that talking about from Simavi Women's point of view, it is not us that make the decision, of course, and that makes also the Water Justice Fund unique. So we're setting up a board that is really going to determine how much funding is going to which countries, which topics are really, really crucial, and also how we are connecting all of the different water activism around the world. So we're looking also for key experts who would like to take a role in that board, because that's not up to us to decide. So this is also an invitation for everybody who is interested in taking up this position. And of course, people can fund the Water Justice Fund, so it's a really pooled funding mechanism. So we are collecting all of the different funding and then channeling it through the countries. And of course, organizations that are really working closely with women-led initiatives or women's groups that see a role for themselves can also get involved into the Water Justice Fund. And why? Well, I hope I've explained that well, but it is, I think only if we look at this summer around the world, it was the hottest month in July all around the world. Water is really becoming the scarcest good in the world, and we really have to make sure that the poorest of the poor also have access to water in the future, and that we put that resilience and funding, therefore, in the hands of women.
We are nearing the end of this session, but Jane, is there one insight that you wish that we all took from this when we walk away from this discussion?
Well, one thing I want to say is that we have to think about how to bring on board women and utilize their resources that they have and tap on their capacity to be able to be implementers and adapters of climate change. So it's not going to be business as usual. Alex, we make a turnaround and be able to support women initiatives, then we will be able to move forward. The other thing is looking at climate change, especially where I come from, where Kajiado County, we are prone to frequent droughts, and women are really impacted. So what I want us to take away from this session is it's not going to be business as usual unless we make a turnaround on how we implement our initiatives towards climate change and climate resilience.
Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your experience and visions for the future. And I think this ignites hope for not only women, but for every one of us. The importance of getting access to water and resource to manage it can't be stressed enough. And now we leave the online audience, and I leave the speakers to you in the audience here to ask questions.